Cinema is home to countless legendary one-liners, lines that make you laugh,
Yes, it's true. This man has no dick.
lines that make you cry,
I can't carry it for you, but I can carry you!
lines that make you think.
Like tears in rain.
But rarely does a single line manage to do all of those things while simultaneously reaffirming, modernizing, and justifying the continued existence of one of the most iconic characters in all of American fiction. But somehow, James Gunn has done exactly that, and in just 6 words, no less. Maybe that's the real punk rock. I know some of you might be scratching your heads, so I think some context is in order here. So let's just do a quick recap of the exchange before we get into why it matters so much. A few scenes prior, Clark and Lois get into a fight over Superman's decision to stop the Baravians from invading Jarhanpur. She tells him she knew their relationship wouldn't work, and he leaves feeling dejected. Luthor reveals the truth of Jor-El's message, steals his foster dog, and thus the entire world turns on Superman, leaving him at presumably his lowest point since becoming a public superhero. So here is where the punk rock exchange begins. Clark returns home to find Lois already there. He apologizes for their fight, and she agrees, but asserts that arguments are inevitable given how different they are. Lois calls herself a punk rock kid, and Clark tries to say he's a punk rock kid too, but she shoots him down, mocking his favorite bands as radio pop garbage. But really, the music talk is just a shorthand for how differently they see the world. Lois questions everyone and everything, while Clark trusts instinctively and thinks everyone is beautiful. To that, Clark responds simply, maybe that's the real punk rock. So why is this line so important? Because Superman is a character that has existed in a perpetual state of misreading for my entire lifetime. He was always too powerful, too boring, too outdated, and too obvious. Even when I was a kid, saying your favorite superhero was Superman was like saying your favorite band was the Beatles. Which, by the way, is a totally valid musical opinion, and I will die on that hill. But the point is, because of that negative connotation, every time someone tried to modernize Superman, like Zack Snyder or that guy who did the X-Men movies and a lot of other stuff I won't be mentioning here, they fell back on cloying Christ metaphors or shameless pastiche, as if those were the only viable ways to reintroduce this character to a world that was clearly about ready to leave him in the past. But in this punk rock exchange between Lois and Clark, Gunn proves the way to successfully modernize Superman is to remind us that his commitment to kindness, empathy, and sincerity isn't old-fashioned or hokey. Instead, it's actually the most radical and rebellious act a person can commit, especially in a world where those attributes are increasingly devalued. Despite that stale reputation I mentioned earlier, in actuality, Superman has a deceptively rich and diverse publishing history. He's been around for almost 100 years now, and in that time he's been interpreted and reimagined in thousands of different ways. But whether he's a leftist power fantasy fighting capitalist goons at the end of the Great Depression, or a cosmic demigod grappling with impossible choices, kindness has always been central to Superman's mission. Unless we're talking about injustice, I guess.
You killed these children.
But instead of characterizing Superman's kindness as a factory default setting, Gunn decides to position it as his most powerful asset. For this Superman, compassion isn't just a byproduct of his duty as a Kryptonian or American or superhero. It's his calling. It's the thing that gets him out of bed in the morning. It's the bedrock of his value set, and it's the sole reason his power is something people in his world can aspire to, rather than something they just worship in silent reverence. But this punk rock line doesn't just successfully modernize Superman as a character. It also proves why this story is so needed in this current cultural climate. It's no secret that superhero media has valued snark over sincerity since
I am Iron Man.
Especially when stacked up against the grimdark self-seriousness of the Snyderverse, the MCU became the gold standard for comic book filmmaking through self-referential quips and ironic detachment.
And I have a bow and arrow. None of this makes sense.
But after nearly 2 decades of the biggest franchise in film history acting like it has to constantly denigrate itself to justify its own existence, fans have seemingly grown tired of all these sly winks and nods to the camera. In other words, maybe the biggest comic book film franchise in the world shouldn't believe comic books are too silly for cinema. Maybe they should celebrate the medium in all of its pulpy glory, instead of incessantly insisting it's not serious enough to be written sincerely. And it's not just superhero media, it's social media, it's music, it's comedy, and it's even the way we all interact with each other interpersonally. In a culture where caring is seen as corny, this type of radical sincerity from a character as iconic as Superman might just be the inflection point we needed to get back to storytelling that means what it says and isn't ashamed to stand behind it 10 toes down. But the real reason why this line hit me like a ton of bricks are its quietly genius political implications. Despite its loud color pop aesthetics, James Gunn's Superman does have a political point of view, and it's not exactly subtle. All of the political actors in this film, from the backroom Pentagon wheelers and dealers to Lex Luthor and even to Lois Lane, Superman's decision to stop a well-funded militarized nation from invading its neighbor is framed as naive and disruptive. When Superman stopped the Baravian invasion, he wasn't thinking about the intricacies of geopolitics or the vested interests of defense contractors or even the fact that Baravia is technically an American ally. He just saw that people were about to die because someone was abusing their power, so he used his own to stop them. And this movie posits, correctly in my opinion, all the hand-wringing about complexities and contracts and allies and adversaries is just a calculated distraction. It's a smokescreen to obscure the obvious truth of Superman's simple yet entirely humanistic approach. Compassion always trumps conquest. And in the real world, where those in power consistently frame compassion as weakness or naivety, the type of messaging Gunn is trafficking in here feels like the most timely and affecting theme a movie about a guy in red tights could ever hope to impart on us. Punk rock often gets branded as an insular, snobby, and overly brash subculture. And yes, I won't deny that gatekeeping has always been integral to punk's DNA. In fact, Lois Lane does a great job of keeping that particularly annoying aspect of the punk ethos alive and well in this film. But at its best, and when it really matters, punk rock has always been about inclusivity, community, and righteousness. Things that this Superman embodies fully and unapologetically. Which is why thematically linking these two ostensible polar opposites of American culture is quite possibly the most brilliant bit of screenwriting the superhero genre has ever produced. Yes, I really do think it's that good. If you take anything away from this movie, let it be this. No, Jim from The Office is not punk rock for being too cool for school. Michael Scott, on the other hand, totally is. Tony Stark is not punk rock for winking at the camera while blasting AC/DC. Clark Kent, on the other hand, totally is. Sonic Youth is not punk rock for stealing Nardwar's hat. Nardwar, on the other hand, totally is. If you know, you know. Elon Musk is not punk rock for training Grok to love Hitler. Greta Thunberg, on the other hand, totally is. Because in a culture devoid of authenticity, sincerity is revolutionary. In a political climate devoid of compassion, empathy is radical. And in a world that seems hell-bent on indifference, against all odds, kindness is cool. And maybe, just maybe, that's the real punk rock. So as always, thanks so much to everyone who made it this far. Like and subscribe for more content like this, and I'll catch y'all soon.